Mihir S. Sharma, Restart, the last chance for the Indian economy. Embark on a comprehensive journey exploring India's economic challenges as Restart, the last chance for the Indian economy, artfully uncovers the reasoning behind the country's stagnated growth. Discover India's struggles with unemployment, insufficient infrastructure, and failed industrial strategies that continue to hurt its economy, despite a large labor force. The summary dissects problems faced by farmers leading to stagnant rural development, and investigates the government's flaws in approaching the private sector for assistance. Successful reforms to improve India's future are thoroughly examined, ultimately providing an opportunity for better infrastructure, increased productivity, and efficient investments.
India's traffic woes. India's poor infrastructure, rooted in the country's culture of minimalism, has led to severe traffic problems. Despite the construction of a bridge known to be insufficient to handle the city's traffic, Indian culture values avoiding excessive expenses. This mindset, promoted by Gandhi's socialist ideals, has led to serious repercussions for the country's economy. The inadequate infrastructure has made it difficult for manufacturers to fulfill orders on time, resulting in a significant waste of time and resources for the transportation industry. The traffic congestion in India causes stress, time wastage for commuters and hampers the country's economy, with Indian trucks spending only 40% of their time on the road, with the rest spent waiting in long queues at tax checkpoints. The cheapest way to send goods within India, from Bangalore to Hyderabad, is through Europe, indicating the extent of the traffic problem's impact on the country's economy. India's struggle with unemployment. India's unemployment rate is on the rise despite having an infinite number of potential workers. The problem stems from shrinking farms, low wages, and the difficulty of finding jobs in factories. Most Indian companies avoid growth due to strict regulations that make it challenging to fire unproductive employees. Additionally, corrupt government inspectors target larger companies and demand bribes. Despite the fact that half of the employed people in India are still employed by farms, farm production accounted for less than 15% of India's GDP. As a result, a lack of job opportunities in agriculture and manufacturing industries has led to a surge in unemployment in India. India's loan crisis. India experienced a loan crisis in the early 1990s due to unsustainable spending by Rajiv Gandhi's government, which resulted in an increase in external debt. The finance minister at the time, Dr. Singh, advised devaluing the rupee, which backfired and caused further problems, including a decline in manufacturing. The debt crisis also threatened national honor, making it difficult for the government to implement reforms that were necessary to save the economy. India's half measures. India's economic crisis was mishandled through half-hearted reforms that only addressed the symptoms without getting to the root cause. This approach hindered the manufacturing industry and paved the way for exploitative foreign companies. Only the IT industry managed to grow through the chaos of reforms due to its need for less land and fewer regulations. India's economic crisis was mishandled through half-hearted reforms that only addressed the symptoms without getting to the root cause. It was akin to treating the symptoms of an illness rather than curing it. The government's devaluation of the currency intended to speed up domestic production instead of enabling manufacturers to export competitively only worsened the situation. Manufacturers were caught in the middle and couldn't export nor compete with foreign imports. Simultaneously, the government's removal of restrictions on the movement of goods across borders allowed foreign companies to exploit India even more, taking advantage of the poor infrastructure. Amid the chaos of the reforms, finance, telecommunication and information technology were the only industries that managed to grow. This was because the IT industry did not need as much space to produce its goods and faced fewer regulations than the manufacturing industry, which was hindered. Private sector's role in India's infrastructure. In search of assistance to improve India's infrastructure, the government turned to the private sector in the early 2000s. Private companies were asked to make infrastructural improvements in exchange for money, and the system worked well under Prime Minister Manmohan Singh. However, the private sector eventually slowed down their investments in national projects due to fear of economic loss. Companies were deterred by the extensive and often bizarre regulations and rules that demanded them to fill out two different forms with the same information, which led to the fear of attracting government inspectors. Moreover, they saw an opportunity to exploit government resources and raised their demands after starting projects. This system was doomed from the beginning, and by 2013, investment in national projects had dropped to 1% of the country's GDP. Splitting responsibility in construction projects. Construction companies in India have taken shortcuts in their construction operations to save money, which has led to safety hazards and delays. The solution is to split construction projects between two companies, one that runs the operations and another that does the actual building. This will keep both companies in check and reduce negative outcomes. Additionally, the government can hire inspectors and regulators to oversee the project or create an internal monitoring system. Ideally, citizens can fund construction projects through the government while leaving the actual building to the private sector. Greed and seeking higher returns on investment has caused issues in the private sector, but ordinary citizens and finance from other countries can cover a portion of the cost, leaving the rest to the private sector instead of expecting them to provide everything. Private sector control in India. Private companies controlling natural resources pose a threat to Indian people. The government's cooperation with the private sector requires an open market that holds private companies accountable for their actions. An open market ensures that companies pay appropriate prices for resources and reflects the cost of extraction and environmental damage. Companies should buy from the free market rather than rigged auctions. The article cites Tata and Adani, two companies that won bids to supply electricity to India's western states but increased prices and shut down part of their plants, causing blackouts in the north and west of the country when the Supreme Court wanted them to abide by their contracts. An open market would prevent such problems and keep the private sector honest. Reforming agriculture in India. Indian agriculture industry can transform itself into a productive sector if the government helps farmers produce a more diverse range of crops, instead of subsidizing the same two crops. India's agriculture industry has become stuck in place, producing the same two crops of rice and wheat, despite producing a surplus of these staples. Although hunger is no longer a significant problem in the country, farms still need to be more productive. The government's intervention and the current system are to blame for the industry's stagnation. The government must take a different approach to make Indian agriculture an efficient and productive sector. Farmers need greater autonomy, proper infrastructure and support in facing the damages caused by monsoons. They also require refrigerated trucks, cold storage facilities, and better roads to transport their products and grow a more diverse range of crops. Currently, the government's attempt to support farmers with cheap resources actually makes them less efficient when they are trying to sell their products at low prices. These subsidies cause farmers to continue focusing on wheat and rice, whereas growing other crops may be more profitable. To improve the agricultural industry fundamentally, it is necessary to encourage farmers to grow a range of crops. The government needs to provide incentives to farmers by making available adequate irrigation facilities, enforcing relevant policies and regulations, supporting the establishment of a more extensive network of canals and localized dams, and prioritizing infrastructure development. Although it will not be easy to reform the agricultural sector, exploring the solutions mentioned above will bring a significant change.
Restart, the last chance for the Indian economy unravels the complexities behind India's economic woes, from infrastructural inadequacy to inefficient farming practices. The summary draws a vivid picture of how the government's half-hearted attempts at reforms continue to impede progress, resulting in a dwindling economy. It has also exposed the unfavorable working conditions and loopholes in dealing with the private sector, highlighting the urgency for reform. By understanding the intricacies of India's economic downfall and considering the suggestions for improvement, the reader is left with an insightful and informative comprehension of India's current economic challenges and potential trajectory towards growth and stability.